Welcome. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by Organization Development and Change, Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a monthly webinar series presented during your lunch hour. My name is Yulin Chang. I'm a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development Program. We also have Sakun Giri, who is the moderator for Q&A session. Today, we are presenting Transitioning from Incarceration to Reentry, a promising opportunity for OD presented by Dr. Joseph Hoffer. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please use the chat feature in Zoom platform. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change are designed for professionals who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in our organization. Furthermore, there is a PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, our presenter is Dr. Joseph Hoffer. Dr. Hoffer was born and raised in the suburbs of Philadelphia and is a first-generation college graduate. He received a Bachelor of Science degree, a master's degree in vocational industrial education, and a PhD in workforce education and development from Pennsylvania State University. Joe has worked in hospitality, manufacturing, and most recently in the technology sector. He founded Reclaimir in 2001, a cybersecurity firm located in Central PA, and has been operating for over past 20 years. He is actively involved in prison reform and community reentry. Joe holds leadership positions in numerous national organizations and volunteers to work with high school students. Now, please join me in welcoming our speaker. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to it. And let's just jump into things right off the bat. First of all, when we say, how can something be promising for the OD space? And especially when we start talking about prison reform and transitioning from prison into what we call the free world when we're inside prison, would seem that's probably a far stretch, right? I think that the reality is, as we start to boil down the numbers and we take a look at the impact and what's at stake, I think it's a promising opportunity for all of us that are in workforce education and development, and what it means to the organizations that we work with, perhaps the consulting work that we do or will do at some point in time, or even maybe the research that we would be interested in conducting. But in order to get started, what I want to do is, you can take a look at the slide. I realize it's busy and it's meant to be busy to really talk about impact, but what I want to do is I want to kind of share with you from a US perspective and then dial that into Pennsylvania. So in the United States today, our population accounts for about 5% of the world's population. And yet 25% of the world's incarcerated population, or about 2 million, live here in the United States of America. And that is the very first place where I paused right before I chose my research topic for my dissertation and said, there's something wrong with that. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so we start to take a look at numbers, both annually and then over a period of time. So there are approximately 2 million people in the United States prison system today. This year, in 2022, we will release about 675,000 people from prison. And that cohort that will be released this year, in 3 years from now, the recidivism rate, or the opportunity that someone will reoffend and go back into the prison system, about 63% or 425,000 people will go back into prison in 3 years from now at an annualized cost of about $44,000 per person. So at lunch, in your cubicle, at home, wherever you may be, I think simply taking out your phone, pulling out your calculator, and crunching the numbers really gives you the financial impact, right? But there is a greater impact on the human capital side, where we have 2 million people, in many cases, very productive, very innovative, very creative, and very able to be in the workforce, that have been removed from the workforce. And additionally, they've been removed from their families, from their communities, and they have been relegated to a cell. Now, I'm not advocating that we just simply turn around and we forget that they have offended and we just let everyone out of prison. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that in this particular case, we have 2 million people that are in prison, and this is an ever-growing problem and a challenge. In Pennsylvania, we'll use Pennsylvania as an example, we have about 55,000 people that are in prison in Pennsylvania. This year, we will release approximately 16,000 of those individuals will be released. And in 3 years from now, in that cohort, about 8,000 of them will be back in prison again. And Pennsylvania's annualized cost is about $40,000 to $41,000 per person per year. So again, economically, it has a sticker shock to it, right? I think what you have to pay attention to, again, is it's the loss of human capital. It's the opportunity for an individual that could be working, they could be contributing, they could be in an apartment, they could own a home, they could be a part of their family, whatever it may be, and yet they're in prison. So now you say, well, you know, when they go to prison and they're gonna get out and things are gonna work out for them. Having done my research in prison, conducting interviews, and having done prison workshops for both men and women, I can tell you that the landscape that is in the prison system today is not a positive one. It is not rehabilitative. It is not transformative. It is not life-changing, except to the degree where men and women are institutionalized, traumatized, and in many cases are unable to reintegrate into society. And so those are just some of the challenges that they experience when they're inside prison. The challenges that they face when they get out are even worse. So I share this slide with you in the statement because I think it's important that when we talk about our profession and whether we are a member of the Society for Human Resource Management, or we're a member of the Organization Development Network, or any other professional association that we as workforce ed professionals are a part of, I think it's important to understand where are people coming from and what is their position. It became apparent even before 2019 that we have this population of people that are coming out of prison, and if we don't do something to help represent the voiceless in order to advance policy and to change the outcome, we're never going to be able to have any impact on this problem. When I was doing my research, one of the major challenges that we found was when someone gets out of prison, if you want to walk through the process, when they get out of prison, they're given something called gate money. And typically it's $20, $30, some amount of money. And they are literally escorted out of prison with their personal belongings. And they are now told, go out and be productive. That's literally what the experience is like. And so now imagine you have to go find a home and a job, because that's going to be a condition of your parole or probation. And where do you begin, especially if you meet someone, imagine meeting someone who is in prison for 50 years. Imagine meeting someone who's been in prison for such a period of time that they have never used an ATM card, they've never used Google, and they wouldn't even know where to begin with a smartphone. And what you tell them is, go get a job and a place to live. So the Society for Human Resource Management realizes that, sure, there are criminal backgrounds and criminal records, and that's a challenge, that's a problem. We can't overlook that. But also understand that when we talk about 675,000 people getting out of prison this year, what we know to be true is that about 19 million people in the United States have a felony on their record. 19 million. So those are the people that are cutting your grass, bagging your groceries. Maybe they're working in the cubicle next to you, but they have a felony on their record. And in many cases, these individuals don't get the opportunity to really find meaningful employment, if employment at all. It's a huge challenge, a huge challenge. And so I think you have to begin to ask yourself the question, so why is this promising for organizational development individuals? Why should we care? You should care because at some point in time, 95% of the people that are in prison today are going to get out. They're going to come home, and they're going to come home to your neighborhood, and they're going to be in the same stores in which you shop. And if we don't find a way to integrate them back into society, then they're going to recidivate, and we're going to continue the cycle over and over again. More importantly, they are some of the most creative, entrepreneurial, and innovative people you can imagine. Now, I will share this example with you, and it may sound kind of silly, but some of the most entrepreneurial men and women I have met have been those individuals that are involved in crime. They understand marketing, they understand distribution, they understand human resource management, incentives, discipline, etc. And I don't mean that in a flippant manner, but they do. Their mind is wired in a way that is just, it's incredible when you sit down and talk with them. What needs to occur then is inside the prison system, rather than human warehousing, we have to find a way to deliver programming that's going to allow for more transformation. And so that's really what we want to be able to do. We want to be able to develop programming that really works on that entrepreneurial mindset, that survival instinct, that ability to have grit to get through and then transition to the outside. That's going to be one of the keys when we talk about what does success look like on the inside. I also wanted to take a look at Organization Development Network and looked at the mission and the vision and the purpose. And what really caught my eye as I went through the website and read about the organization was this idea that ODN helps to enable OD professionals to elevate humanity and to develop organizations and achieve results. And that was the aha moment for me, that I said, here's a challenge. Here's a social challenge I would view of the 21st century, one of many, but one I focus on. And then be able to go back to the professional association and say, what better way to help elevate humanity than by being able to deal with a disenfranchised population of men and women, those that are previously incarcerated, and to be able to help them, and thereby by helping them further develop organizations and to achieve results. That was kind of the connection I made. And so as we take a look at the value that these men and women bring to the table, again, from my own personal experience, it is absolutely incredible. I participated in a number of different business plan competitions, both at Penn State University, other colleges and universities, and most recently since 2017 in the prison system. And you may be wondering yourself, in the prison system, you gotta be kidding me. No, not at all. And I will tell you that some of the best plans, both in marketing strategy, financial acumen, achievability of the sales goal, and the overall practical and realistic approach to the problem that they wanted to solve, I saw in the prison system. You know, men and women that are in prison don't want to be there. And when they have the opportunity to get out, they don't want to go back. Now, there are a number of societal barriers and obstacles that get in their way that cause them to go back. But at the end of the day, people do not want to be in prison, just like people don't wake up wanting to be poor. People don't strive to be in poverty. And so when I interviewed the research participants, and then I've interviewed others, what is fascinating is their overall view of, I simply want to have a second chance to prove that, yes, I made a mistake and I own that mistake. But more importantly, I want to prove that I'm good enough never to go back to prison again. Now, are there individuals that have personality issues? There are mental health challenges. There are behavioral issues, et cetera. And so absolutely, I'm not here to tell you that this is just, you know, one size fits all and we can go ahead and hire everyone. What I am saying is that we have to be able to do a better job on the front side when they're in prison through assessment, evaluation, et cetera, to really help them to make that transition to the outside free world. But once they make that transition to the outside free world, that's not where it stops. Organization development professionals, those in SHRM, all of us have to realize that when they get ready to come into employment, the work continues. It could be in life coaching, it could be in financial planning, it could be in behavioral management, it could be in conflict resolution and conflict management. Those things are going to be pivotal for them in order to be successful. So to me, the promise is, here is a population of people that's getting out of prison. And I don't know about all of you, but I travel a great deal. And even here in Pennsylvania, I regularly see hiring signs. We're hiring. And so for the last couple of years, when I've seen those signs, or even when I haven't, I've taken the opportunity to ask the manager owner, would you hire somebody that was a convicted felon? And what I find more so now than ever before was, it all depends. It's not that hard, no. It's not, absolutely not. It is, it all depends. And it should depend. I mean, I can understand that there is the stigma. You know, we in this country, we have built this persona that someone who goes to prison is a really bad person. They should be locked up forever. They sharpen their teeth and they eat babies. I know that sounds silly, but that's what we have taught people and ingrained in the thought process about those people that are in prison. And so if we now take a look at these individuals as another member of the team that perpetrated a crime, they were punished and they went to jail, and we can find a way to plug them into an organization and give them ongoing support and help them to improve, we win and so do they. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish at the end of the day, is to find a way to create a situation where they win, the organization wins, and ultimately the community in which they live wins as well. So I don't read slides, but I think that these are, you know, many of the challenges, whether it was in 21 or 22 or whatever we want to forecast and look at in 23 and beyond, these are changes, or I should say, these are challenges that, you know, we face as organizational leaders. These are challenges that I face as a business owner. I've owned a business now for the last 21 years. It's a cybersecurity company. I'm incredibly blessed to do that. I'm really glad that I get to share back as well. But these challenges that are here, that are listed here, are challenges that I face as a business owner. And so in taking a look at that and realizing that these are what Penn State is challenged by, the companies that you work for are challenged by, the companies that you're going to be working for after you graduate from Penn State or wherever you are today, or if, by the way, if you decide that you want to hang a shingle and become a consultant, you most likely are going to bump into some of these challenges and others. And what I thought would make a really good connection with the content was to take a look at these and then do a comparison to see what is it about these particular challenges connected to the population of incarcerated men and women. The Prison Policy Initiative was one of probably the top 10 areas that I used during my dissertation for support and research. And what I did is I took a look at the challenges and identified the 3 that are on the screen. And each one of those, we're going to share some examples, but each one of them I've experienced directly with men and women that I've worked with in the prison system, both here in Pennsylvania and also in Texas. And you would maybe sit back and take a look at something like innovation and wonder, like, what do you mean? Like, how can somebody who's in prison be innovative? Well, first of all, when you go to prison, the very first thing you have to learn to do is to survive. It is one of the most difficult, brutal, and traumatic environments that you will ever experience as a human being. And you completely and totally lose freedom. Everything about your day is managed by someone else, and you no longer have control over when you wake up and when you eat and when you shower, etc. Had a conversation with Sagun earlier, and he told me that he was at a conference last week and he came home and he's kind of sick and he's got to take care of himself because he's a little bit under the weather. Now imagine that you don't get to go to conferences anymore. You don't get to decide when you're going to go to the park. This is the reality. Now, some people honestly will say, well, you know what, Joe, they're in prison. They should be punished. I'm not arguing whether or not people should be punished when they're in prison. You broke the law, pay the consequence. I get that. I really do. What I am saying, however, is that those men and women need an opportunity to transform their lives, rehabilitate their behavior, so when they come out, they don't go back to prison again. For those of you who did the numbers before, 44,000 times 2 million, that's a lot of zeros. And even if we have the ability to cut that number by 25%, imagine where that 25% could be spent. K through 12 education, infrastructure, et cetera, and so forth. So when I took a look at these 3 different topics, I wanted to see how did they relate to those people that are incarcerated today. Prison Fellowship, an incredible organization. Again, I don't read slides, but what I will tell you is the research that we've done and the research that's out in the field today shows and can be demonstrated that those men and women that come out of prison are given a second chance and get a full-time job and become part of their community really do in fact become incredibly productive people. And here's one of the reasons why. They have a major incentive to be productive. And that incentive is they never want to go back to prison again. People in prison do not look forward to going back. Now, there are some men and women that will most likely never get out of prison and will not get out of the cycle just simply because of mental health issues and other societal problems. But the vast majority, 95% of the people that you will meet in prison do not want to go back. So there is a true incentive to them. They also have a desire to be able to prove to their family members, to their community, perhaps to their church, etc., that, you know what, I was glad I got a second chance. I want to earn that second chance. And by doing so, I want to be a productive citizen. I want to contribute and give back. I want to make sure that when someone looks at me, they don't look at me any differently, even if they do know that I have a felony on my record. And that really resonates with them a great deal. I had the opportunity to work with a man in Texas, and one of the things that he really wanted to be able to do was start his own food truck company. And he did that. He was fortunate enough to be able to find an investor and start a food truck company. And it wasn't enough for Raul to turn around and run a successful food truck company, but he wanted to make sure that he hired other previously incarcerated men and women to work in his business. That's all there was. Like, that was incredibly important to him. Had another opportunity in the fall of last year to go to Notre Dame and be part of the experiential classroom program for entrepreneurship educators. And that was great experience, beautiful campus, wonderful folks. But one of the folks that I met when I was there, a gentleman by the name of Michael, African-American man, had been in prison, had grown up in poverty. And long story short, basically what he did was he built a catering business off of his mother's recipes and now does exclusive catering for Notre Dame's special events. And absolutely incredible. Also hires those men and women that are previously incarcerated. So are all of the stories going to be that positive? No, they're not. And I can share with you, unfortunately, more failures right now than we do have success stories. But like I said to Yuling earlier, we have to start somewhere. We got to draw a line in the sand. And I think now when we take a look at the challenges that employers are facing, small, medium, large, across the United States, in regard to not being able to fill jobs, whether those are trades, labor jobs, highly technical jobs, whatever it may be, we have an incredible opportunity to do something to positively impact this population of men and women and to create long-term value for the organizations that we serve. And I just think it's a remarkable time for us, and it's a positive time for us if we do it correctly. If we don't take the attitude, well, I'm not going to get my hands dirty, we'll just throw together some new policy and we'll throw some money at it and everything will be fine. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you from experience, that doesn't happen. That doesn't work. We really have to have a very holistic approach to the challenge. And I think organizations like SHRM and others and second chance legislation are going down that road. We just have more work to do together. An example of innovation. I think Dan Meyer is a pretty cool guy, obviously, for the work that he does. When you say innovation, like, how can somebody who's in prison be innovative? Okay, so no matter what prison you go to, maximum security, medium or minimum, you will regularly find homemade weapons in prison cells or in other places where they're stored in prison. You will also find homemade alcohol. And you're like, what? Oh, yeah. So how is that innovative? Well, think about it. So how are you going to create alcohol? I mean, we understand how alcohol is created, right? But how are you going to do that? Their innovation is about looking at a current situation and determining what are we going to do differently to get a better result. That's really what it's about. You know, we innovate manufacturing, we innovate HR systems, we innovate the delivery of service. It's all about looking at something currently and saying, how can we do this differently? I've got to get this problem solved. The entrepreneurial mindset is powerful. Innovation happens to be a fuel source for that. And so when you're in prison and you're in a situation where you have to figure out how to survive, how are you going to get things done, et cetera, you tend to have a very innovative approach to getting things done. I think the work that Dan has done is an example of what many other organizations around the United States are not only looking at and considering, but they're going to begin engaging in very soon. The reality is that if we're looking for an employee today that has an absolutely clean record and they're willing to work for the money that we want to pay them and the benefits package that we want to give them, et cetera, and so forth, we may be looking at the wrong place. I can tell you again, having been a business owner for almost 22 years, that it is very difficult to find good employees, let alone when we try to find great employees. And I believe that we've got an opportunity to take a look at this population and not only give these men and women a second chance, but to realize that they can improve our organizations. No different than how we have embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion. We should have done it a long time ago. But this is another population of folks, very similar to the population of those that are disabled, our veterans, immigrants. We have an incredible opportunity in front of us. It's whether or not we're going to engage that opportunity. And I think that those organizations that truly take a look at this population, the formerly incarcerated, and how they can integrate them into their workplace, those are the companies that are going to make really great strides going forward. And finally, engagement. I know that when I was in graduate school, engagement was a very big topic for dissertations and just for the workplace in general. And again, when we think about engagement, why would we think that someone who was incarcerated would be even more engaged in their work or engaged in their community? And again, there's a common element. And the common element is they don't want to go back to prison. They want to prove that they deserve the second chance. They want to prove that they can be a good son or daughter. They want to prove that they can be a good parent. I work with a group of women in Texas, and it is phenomenal the type of volunteer work that they all do inside the prison walls for other women. Being able to identify those women that haven't gotten a GED, helping women that are trying to put together their case with their lawyer in order to get either an appeal met or to prepare themselves for the parole board. It's incredible. And I've worked with people that are they're not only in prison because of DUI offenses or low-level drug offenses, but I've also worked with mass murderers and burglars, etc. So some of the most heinous crimes you can imagine. And the way in which they view those opportunities, often what I hear is, Joe, I just want a shot. I just want a shot at being able to get out and stay out. When I did my research in Penn State, I took a look at interviewing 30 men that were within about 90 days of release, and I wanted to understand the particular program that they were in, and what were the helping features, what were the hindering features, and what were the wish list items. And the number one wish list item that they had was to be able to focus on a second chance and being able to make sure that they had the opportunity to not only get out of prison, but obviously stay out of prison. So again, when we take a look at things like engagement and innovation and productivity, and I would argue that we could probably look at that entire list. Turnover, if I recall, on the top of that list. What we know again from research is that the incarcerated population, when they come into the workforce, are less likely to call off work sick. They're less likely to show up for work late. They're less likely to quit that very first job. And much of it has to do with the fact that they are just incredibly grateful that they have a job to begin with. And they all know that this is not your forever job. This is a job in order to meet parole and probation requirements. But when they get into that workplace where they are truly part of the organization, it is incredible what they accomplish and really the value that they bring to their employer. I thought that this was kind of a good way to begin to wrap up. Never had the opportunity to meet Johnny Taylor, but I I really appreciate his sentiment, the support from SHRM, as well as the National Reentry Resource Center, and even from the Council of State Governments. Also have provided a lot of the research for my dissertation. But when we take a look at what we have to do, we have to look at the problem differently than we have in the past, because what we've done in the past just hasn't worked. And again, I'm not advocating that we just simply let everyone out of prison. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that we have to do things differently. And if I were able to take a blank sheet of paper and draw that successful model, we would begin with a different set of assessment tools when someone goes into prison. Those assessment tools would drive the programming that deals with, in some cases, cognitive disorders, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, sex addiction, etc. Okay. From there, we've got to take a look at how are we going to help individuals modify the behavior that got them into prison to begin with. Okay. And have a program that is very individualized per person. And then as they transition out into the free world, there would be social services that would bundle or wrap around to that as well. And those social services could go for perhaps 90 days. Maybe they went for as long as a year. I'm not exactly sure, but there has to be a very holistic approach. If we only do programming in the prison, then we don't do them any good when they get out and they have to transition into the real world, and vice versa. It really has to be very holistic. This is a nonprofit that my wife and I started this year. We began it because I think we can talk about things a lot. I think that, whatever your passion may be, at some point in time, you have to draw a line in the sand and you have to go from talking to doing. You have to action things. And so that's what we're doing. We're starting in the county in which we live, which is in Huntington County. And we're going to be working with those men and women that are on probation and parole. We have about 760 men and women on probation and parole in Huntington County. We have 67 counties in Pennsylvania. Again, you do the basic math. By the way, there are other counties that have literally thousands of men and women that are on probation and parole. So you can see that the need is great. And really to talk about how are we going to help individuals not only not go back into the prison system again, but how are we going to help them to be more productive? Because people want to have a sense of self. They want to have a sense of belonging and value. And regardless of the criminals that I've talked to, when they come to that place where they finally own their crime and they forgive themselves for that crime, all they're looking for is an opportunity to simply give back, to be productive, and to know that they're worth something. This was a group of women that I worked with recently over a 3-day workshop where I delivered the entrepreneurial mindset profile. We ran an assessment based on both traits and skills, and then we built out their developmental life plan using that assessment. Some of the coolest people on the planet, their stories, their obstacles, their hardships, just absolutely phenomenal. And what you don't see in the picture is what got them there. And what was fascinating when we talked individually is the number one thing that got them there was lack of impulse control. That moment when they just lost control, that moment when they made that bad decision, that moment when they did not check the governor to make sure that they weren't going to go off the rails. And yet now they've become more self-aware. They've improved their emotional intelligence. They understand what they have to do differently moving forward. Imagine if they would have had that kind of opportunity in programming prior to prison, perhaps half of them would not would not be there today, or maybe all of them. I don't know for sure. So it's an incredibly unique population of men and women. Unfortunately, I don't think that all of them can be saved, but I do believe that the vast majority of the 2 million deserve and warrant a lot more work, both by policymakers, legislators, practitioners, academicians, researchers. We need to stop just talking about criminal justice reform and start doing criminal justice reform. And I think that we have we've got a clear path forward. We just have to be willing to do the work and spend the money and grind it out, because each one of those faces represents, in many cases, entrepreneurs, moms, daughters, employees, etc. And what's fascinating is that they own it and they know why they're there. And now what they're looking for is the second chance, because they want to make sure that they're not there in the future. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to you on a topic which is near and dear to my heart. It's a personal mission for my wife and I. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to work on it with her. And so I'm just really glad I could share it with you. Let's see. Have you collaborated with probation and parole professionals to find out what resources are actually available through them in the community? Yes, I have, and it all depends on the community in which you're living. You know, there are some communities that are very in tune with the needs and very helpful and supportive, and unfortunately, there are many that are not. It's also helpful if you know their restrictions so that you do not inadvertently cause them to violate the terms of supervision. Absolutely. I've seen that happen on more than one occasion, where they're just so happy to get out that they don't pay attention to their restrictions, and they really don't know what the rules are, which is unfortunate.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Joe.
Sure.
We have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
And the first question is, what are your long-term plans to reduce prison recidivism? Are there any collaborators to scale your holistic approach?
Long-term plans, 2023 is when we will fully implement the programming for probation and parole in Huntington County. The goal is to eventually deliver programming inside the Pennsylvania DOC. We have approval to do that, and when outside programming can be delivered, that will start. We have formed the nonprofit, structured the curriculum, its delivery and methodology, so that this is something that can be replicated nationally. The goal is to create a model here in Pennsylvania that can be replicated across the country. So, you know, this may sound kind of silly, but to use kind of the franchise in a box model, and realizing that there are monies available through private donors, fundraising, grants, foundations, and then depending upon the programming that we're talking about, there's also money available at the state and federal level.
Thank you, Joe. Another question comes from Tamika Means. She asks, are you familiar with the reentry results when they have a strong versus non-existent support system?
Am I familiar with, is the name of the program Reentry Results?
Reentry results.
I am not familiar with that, no.
Got it. We have another question from Kate. She says, this was fantastic. Can you talk more about your nonprofit and how we can get involved?
Sure. So the nonprofit Farming to Freedom was started with the idea that it's not about living on a farm or working on a farm, although obviously farming in the United States needs employees too, right? It's about helping an individual farm for opportunities for a second chance, farm for opportunities to create their own business, farm for opportunities just to reconnect with the community. And I would say that the best way to get involved, my contact information is in the slides. Send me an email. My phone number is there. If you want to shoot me a text, that's the best way to get involved. Because where we are today is I'm really looking for resources to help with the assessment aspect of the program. We have the curriculum, but what I'm looking for are really good assessment tools for identifying self-awareness, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution. Those are the three major areas that lead to a lack of impulse control. So being able to get that assessed earlier in the program, I think would be really helpful for the participants.
Thank you, Joe. Tamika has a follow-up question. She says that I'm talking about success of reentry, I think reentry into society. It's not a program. I'm asking about the recidivism rates.
Okay, sorry about that. So if we take a look at the recidivism rates today, they really have not fluctuated all that much in the last 10 years. So as an example, when we take a look at the 3-year recidivism rate today, it's 63% will go back into prison. The reason why the recidivism rates are as high as they are is because we don't have a collaborative approach to true rehabilitative and transformative programming inside prison that is then wrapped around with outside free world support systems and mechanisms. We're either doing some stuff in prison and nothing when they get back to the free world, or we're doing something in the free world, but there's been no experience on the inside.
Thank you,
And
Joe.
Tamika, if I'm not answering your question, bang away at chat until I finally get through to it, because sometimes I'm thick-headed.
Thank you, Joe. Rich Davis asks, have you spoken to the staff and management of for-profit prison management companies? What are their attitudes toward change?
I have not talked to the staff for prison businesses. I can make some assumptions about what their approach would be. I think what we have seen that in some cases, not all, they have started to move their business model where they are more heavily involved in immigration centers than they have been in the past. I think that, you know, part of the challenge that we face is when you have a business that is that flourishes based on having people in prison, that's kind of counterproductive to what we're trying to do. But I also think that there's a greater likelihood that we're going to turn it around than be susceptible to a private sector prison keeping people inside. It's just a matter of being able to work with policymakers, work with employers, and bridge that gap. And again, starting the programming inside prison and allowing it to get wrapped around on the outside.
Thank you, Joe. Another question asks, what are the competencies, entrepreneurship competencies, do you think are the most essential for the formerly incarcerated people?
So I would say, based on what I've seen, their ability to identify, address, and manage risk, their ability to truly understand innovation and what that means when they go from being in prison to the free world. And then finally, I think that there's also got to be an understanding of what does communication look like, and how does that change when I go from prison to the free world? Because I will tell you that the communication strategies on the inside of prison are far different than what we experienced today on this webinar.
Thank you. Another question is, can you talk more about the research method ECIT? What are your suggestions for people wanting to apply this method to workforce education research?
So it was suggested to me by my committee chair, Dr. Yoon. And I have to be honest, I hesitated when it was first introduced to me. And then, like all good students, I went ahead and read research, et cetera, and so forth. And I found it to be very impactful, very insightful, incredibly helpful to me. And I would say that if there are students that are interested in finding more out about it, I'm happy to chat with you. I would also say that I'm pretty sure it's called InfoQuest, but I do know that my dissertation can be found online if people are interested in taking a look at how I used ECIT. The most interesting part of it for me was being able to interview and collect out the wish list items as part of ECIT. That was the part that really, I think, created the most robust feedback from the participants. When you ask somebody what was helpful or what wasn't helpful, that's one thing. But when you actually create an environment and an opportunity for them to take a clean sheet of paper and to develop those wish list items, that was a powerful experience, not only for me, but for the participants as well.
Thank you. Tamika has a follow-up question. She says, so I am a prison relationship coach who focuses on the spouse at home. One of my goals is to prepare the spouse for reentry. It would be awesome to learn more about how the support of the spouse and family can help reduce recidivism rates.
Tamika, I really hope that you send me an email at joseph@reclamere.com or call me and send me a text, because I would love to talk to you. You hit on an area that is most often overlooked, and that is what we call family reintegration. So there's reintegration to the community at large, right? But there's also family integration. And more times than not, where we really fall down is we say, okay, Joe is going to be coming home to his mom and dad, and we've done nothing to prepare mom and dad for Joe coming home. And Joe's been in prison for 5 years, and for 5 years he's been told when to eat, when to sleep, when to go to the shower, when to go to the yard, etc. And now all of a sudden his father gets really, really frustrated because Joe keeps asking dad, can I go outside? May I use the phone? Is it time to eat? Am I allowed to open the refrigerator door? And those aren't just like pure play examples. That's what happens to folks, right? So Tamika, I would really love to talk with you, and I admire the work that you're doing, because that reintegration to the family is woefully unprepared.
Thanks, Joe. I think we have chance for one more question. We have time for one more question. So how do I get started as an employer with a second chance employment?
So Pennsylvania has a number of different resources. I think probably the best place for you to start would be at pa.gov, and look up through Google second chance employees within Pennsylvania. If you go into the Google nightmare of link after link and no help, do me a favor and just again send me an email or send me a text, and I'll be happy to connect you with some resources. I do know that that this administration in Pennsylvania is very in tune with second chance employment, and there are a number of really great resources out there. So if you get stymied or you come across a roadblock and I can help in any way, I'm happy to do that. Sagun, if it would be helpful to you guys for others to continue to ask questions, I have time. I don't know if others do, but if there's other questions or anything else I can help the group with today, I'm happy to do that.
Sure. We have I think five more minutes. If someone has a question, can you please put them in chat or the Q&A section? I think we have time for one last question. Thank you. Hi, Joe. I think yes, there is one question from Gina. Have you considered collaborating with second chance employers to host a job fair?
I have considered it. In fact, that's part of the programming that we're going to be doing here in Huntington County in 2023. I think it's a must-have because again, you know, the other place for collaboration is not just with second chance employers, but we also need to have second chance landlords. It is a major challenge when someone's coming out of prison to rent an apartment. In most cases, they can't because they've got to fill out an application, and in many cases, those applications ask you if you're a convicted felon. So that's another major hurdle. That's why so many men and women go back home to where they got in trouble to begin with, because they have no other alternative. First of all, they don't have the security deposit to put down on a new apartment, let alone they don't have a job yet in order to pay rent. So it's a very confusing, complicated web of obstacles. But like I said earlier, it's one of those things where I've drawn a line in the sand, and I'm convinced that we may not cut recidivism in half, but you know, I'm going to give it the college try to knock heck out of it and at least take 25 points off.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Joe. Back to you, Abby.
Sure. Thank you, Sakun and Joel. It was a pleasure being with you all today. On behalf of our OD&C and Workforce Education Program, we hope you think this webinar is helpful. If we did not get to your question, please send us an email or reach out to the presenter directly via email. For the future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take a survey using the link in the chat box. It takes less than 3 minutes. Our next webinar is about Find Your OD Career Calling Assessment and Coaching by Dr. Bill Brendel on December 15th from 12 to 1 p.m. Registration for all events can be found on our website. You can also find us on our social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you.